So good afternoon. Thank you for attending the webinar today. And a little bit of housekeeping before we start. A couple of things to mention is that this is a pre-recording of the first half of a webinar. So as you move forwards, you will see a little change, and the part 2 includes a wrap-up of the Ordinance recommendations and also an engaging participatory Q&A session at the end, which is well worth listening to. So for a little bit of housekeeping, we do not have chat enabled on this webinar. So we asked all attendees to just make sure they kept a note of questions, and that's why we have that interactive Q&A at the end of the session. Next slide. So just to give you a quick overview, I'm Katrina Locke, and I'm the Sustainability and Resilience Manager with Volusia County. Following my project overview, Michelle Morrison will be providing some information on the LID Implementation Guidebook, followed by Jerry Murphy with the UF IFAS program, who will give you some information on LID Ordinance recommendations. Next slide. And next slide, we can skip. Thank you. So the project that you're about to hear about today, the Guidebook and Draft Ordinance, are funded through a Florida Department of Economic Opportunity Community Planning Technical Assistance grant. And so there were a number of different pieces within this grant that were funded, and included, as we mentioned, the Guidebook, the LID recommendations, Ordinance recommendations, and the idea of the grant was to advance resilient nature-based stormwater strategies, not just in Volusia County, but throughout the region. And by considering mechanisms, incentives, and processes to incorporate LID in Volusia County site planning and stormwater management. And throughout everything that we've done through this grant funding, we've been sharing information throughout the East Central Florida region. Slide. So the guidebook that you're going to hear about and the draft ordinance, as I mentioned, were funded through the grant, but it's important to note that the information provided in the webinar today represents the first steps for Volusia County for LID ordinance work. And what we share today with you has not been presented or adopted by the Volusia County Council. But it is part of work that's been done in Volusia County. We've been working on projects to address pollution impact to our springs and rivers, including discussing how green infrastructure or green stormwater infrastructure could reduce those impacts and lessen impacts from flooding in some areas. And in 2019, Volusia County adopted the Regional Resiliency Action Plan, which includes both Volusia County and Brevard County, and includes goals, objectives, and steps to make us more resilient within our areas. And within those goals is this infrastructure and environment goal with an objective to prioritize the use of green infrastructure as a first line of defense, to enhance stormwater systems to be more resilient, and to improve water quality in surface water bodies. So it gives you an idea of the background behind us doing this project. Next slide. And these are the definitions of LID and green stormwater infrastructure that we have used throughout this process and throughout this project. So low impact development, a comprehensive site planning and design strategy for maintaining the pre-development hydrologic regime, peak discharge rate, timing and volume, and mitigating pollutant loads from land development using distributed structural and non-structural design techniques. The goals of LID are to avoid and minimize additional runoff produced from site development. And then the definition of green stormwater infrastructure that we're utilizing. So GSI includes the range of structural and non-structural retention and detention measures that infiltrate, evaporate, detain, filter, or store stormwater runoff closer to the source. The goal of GSI is to mitigate the runoff produced from site development. So within that, we've looked at 3 stages in the development process. So avoidance, and this is both this slide and the prior slide provided by Evan Bean with the University of Florida. So avoidance is when you look at low impact development. So you map natural infrastructure, preserve open spaces, natural areas, trees and native soils, and you retain the natural hydrologic and topographic features in site plan. And then the next step would be to minimize. So again, using LID to limit and disconnect impervious surfaces, mimic and maximize pre-development hydrologic processes, and integrate practices that provide co-benefits and multifunctional areas. And then lastly, you move into green stormwater infrastructure when you're looking at mitigation, which is what was mentioned on the previous slide. So GSI, at this point in mitigation, implement runoff source control measures, employ natural processes to treat and retain stormwater, provide treatment and attenuation in multiple areas across the site. Slide. So there are multiple phases within this grant project, and it was a very tight time frame for the grant, which started in February and runs through till June. And when we conclude all the projects and initiatives within this grant process. So within this, in April and in May and again in June, we took information from the Low Impact Development Ordinance recommendations to Volusia County's Environmental and Natural Resources Advisory Committee, who will provide recommendations to Volusia County Council. Slide. So just to give you an idea of one of the first things that we did within this project and what kicked off a lot of the information that's utilized throughout the guidebook and in the ordinance recommendations is at the beginning of the project in February of 2023, there was a regional roundtable with experts or technical experts from the region were brought together to discuss challenges to low impact development implementation and potential strategies to move low impact development forwards, both in Volusia County and at a regional level as well. And to give you some idea of some of the information that was presented, source control, mitigating impacts, current trends, and Florida stormwater, all through experts with the University of Florida and IFAS. And then there was a case study with information provided by the Volusia County Association of Responsible Development on some of the barriers that they found or the challenges that they found to implementing low impact development. And the roundtable discussion itself provided us with a priority list of barriers and challenges to low impact development. And also, as I mentioned, those strategies for looking at prioritizing those challenges. Slide. So the priority list includes challenges that need to be addressed at both the local and state levels, with collaborative discussion to work towards some implementable strategies. For example, the challenges that are listed on the slide in front of you, and I'm just going to give you a couple of those. So local code inhibits LID, maintenance, cost, labor and training, and regulations and regulator improvement needed. So these challenges also highlighted the need for education and training related to low impact development and green stormwater infrastructure.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Moe from the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. And I'm going to be introducing today the Low Impact Development Implementation Guidebook. So this guidebook, the implementation we're talking about here is twofold. It's considering both LID projects and the mechanisms to allow for LID in a jurisdiction. The guidebook and ordinance recommendations are companions. The guidebook provides the LID GSI implementation examples for various land uses, as well as best management practices. And in order to be effective in the long term, the comprehensive plan must allow LID. So comprehensive plan goals, objectives, policies, GOPs, and land development codes from around the state, and even a few beyond, were compiled in a spreadsheet. These offer sample language for GOP and codes. Highlights of LID and GSI requirements and incentives are also discussed. And finally, we provide examples of existing LID technical design manuals. We recommend the ordinance refers to the design aspects via a technical manual and not putting the technical aspects in the ordinance. So to start out with, I'm going to show you a lot of pictures of some implementations for various land uses. And here we're starting out just outside of our region in Winter Haven. They're concerned about rapid growth, frequent flooding, nutrient impairment, and protecting the water quality of their 52 lake chain. From Gray to Green was an effort funded by FDEP to promote treatment of stormwater as a resource, not a nuisance to be quickly disposed of through pipes and ditches. The use of green LID practices help protect the quantity and quality of water and restore the community's lakes. So this is a commercial application of LID, and it involved redevelopment, reduced and disconnected a previously 100% impervious area from the city's stormwater system, and it's now 100% stormwater infiltrated on site. This is at a local microbrewery. And then moving over to the West Coast in Sarasota County, there is another commercial application using rain gardens, pervious pavers. And I will note that Sarasota County has an excellent water atlas. It's a map where you can click on various locations and see a variety of low impact development, green stormwater infrastructure implementations. Here's another one in the commercial area. Here you see rain garden for processing stormwater. Back to Winter Haven, we're looking now at residential. This is multifamily. It's a 5-story apartment complex. Again, it's a redevelopment effort in which it included removal of all existing impervious surfaces, and then now processing 100% of stormwater on site. You notice also they have underbuilding parking. It's reduced the impervious surface area by 50%. And here's a residential project that is created to address stormwater flooding in residential areas. Use amended soils, bioretention, gravel pathway, and storage areas, as well as native vegetation. This project is in Tampa and was funded through their water management district and the cost share funding project. Something I'll discuss a little bit more about later is collaboration with your water management district. And then this is a much larger scale residential implementation that I think all of us have at least heard about. This unique community, Babcock Ranch, down in Charlotte County. It is FGBC Platinum certification using low impact native plants, naturalized landscape materials, and many more. Stormwater management played a key role in their disaster mitigation and resilience following Hurricane Ian. They have received awards for the highest removal of pollutants in transforming wastewater into reclaimed water, and 90% of the stormwater is recaptured and repurposed. Another residential project, this is back into our region in Osceola County. It is the Sunbridge development, and they have Florida-friendly landscaping requirements. I will say that on our team of experts from the University of Florida, Pierce Jones made a comment one time that I like to pass on. And this is relating to water quality and some of this Florida-friendly landscaping and fertilizing use. Anything that moves away from the application of fertilizers and reclaimed water is moving away from the source of the problem, the water quality problem. So minimizing and eliminating irrigation and fertilizers. So here we're back in Sarasota County, and this is two applications of green roofs, both municipal and commercial. The green roofs paired with a rain garden in one instance and with some rain barrels in the other. The rainwater in those barrels used for irrigation, but also pressure washing of the building, and that is at a tiki bar in Sarasota County. Another municipal installation in Escambia County. It is their office complex, and this is the largest green roof in Florida. Note that green roofs also can provide energy savings through cooling. Another very large implementation in municipal is in Cascades Park, Tallahassee. This is a 25-acre public park with wildlife, ponds, trail systems, amphitheater, restaurant, historic markers, playgrounds, open space. It was formerly a brownfield site with flash flooding issues. And more recently, construction adjacent to the park is a 5-acre mixed-use live, work, play, stay destination. This is an absolutely beautiful implementation. I've been able to tour and spend probably half a day here walking and eating at the restaurants. When I visited my daughter up at Florida State. And in Sarasota County, they have some demonstration projects so that the public can get more involved with LID. Here at the fire station, they have cisterns, 3, capturing thousands of gallons of water, which they use for irrigation, washing trucks, and in emergencies for filling the fire trucks. And then also at their government complex in City Hall, they have some rain barrels that are used for demonstration and also used for irrigation. And in our region, in Cape Canaveral, there's park with permeable walkways, native plants, bioswale, and limiting their use of grass. And in the Manatee Sanctuary Park are the floating wetlands. And these also, interestingly, the city of Sanibel has a DIY floating wetlands manual for creating out of low-cost materials that you can purchase at your local hardware store. They claim improved plant survival and easier maintenance and replanting. These plants sequester excess nutrients and then are periodically harvested to prevent the stored nitrogen and phosphorus from entering the water. And finally, an institutional implementation in Volusia County, which is our partner on this project. And this is at the Stetson Institute for Water and Environmental Resilience. And note that one of the things that came up at our regional roundtable meeting was the need for having more demonstration projects and then actual implementation projects that are noted, that are maybe there's a sign or they are put on the website, that so more and more this gets across to the public as well as professionals on the importance of considering these nature-based solutions. So there is also potential to collaborate with the water management districts. They are not responsible for enforcing something adopted by a local jurisdiction, but local jurisdictions can impose stricter requirements. They can provide technical assistance and can work on expediting LID projects. So consider public pilot projects, some of the ones that I showed in previous slide, But also when doing this, it's important to collect pre and post data so that the water management district has more data to help them with more getting through the process quicker of more and more LID projects. And then I showed a couple of examples of cost share funding. And this is another one here that's in our region. It's the Ocala Wetlands Recharge Park. It's 35 acres of wetlands that were created out of an underutilized 9-hole golf course. This project will result in enhanced aquifer recharge to help Silver Springs by increasing water flow by approximately 2.5 million gallons a day, improving water quality by placing wetland plants to remove nutrients, and providing open space for passive public recreation such as bird watching and hiking. Again, it's a cost share funding project, and these are supported and collaborated with your water management districts. So in talking about how to get started with creating an ordinance, you need to have something in your comprehensive plan that will allow for that. So we started the project off with researching throughout the state for various comprehensive plans that had goals, objectives, or policies, and then also their land development codes to see anything that related to LID or GSI. This is just an excerpt from a spreadsheet that we will also share that contains 129 samples of GOPs, 85 from our region, and 116 codes, 49 from our region. So Doral is the rare municipality to require LID for new and redevelopment. A few other local governments encourage or promote LID GSI through incentives. Notice here, developers shall implement the following non-structural LID practices, and also developers shall implement a minimum of 2 structural LID practices from the following list. Also, maintenance is required. There is additional, other than requirements, they have additional incentives to encourage developers to go above and beyond their minimum requirements. And these incentives include expedited review of permits, implementation of open space credits, fee reductions, and then an awards program. The local governments can offer incentives to encourage developers and property owners to implement LID and GSI techniques. Some of the common incentives that we found are listed here, and the lower 4 are found more in the utilities or municipal rebates or grants. And then the upper incentives are found in the land development codes. We also looked into green parking strategies. Again, LID GSI helps with this. Generally, it's in reducing impervious surface areas, and then also doing some Florida-friendly landscaping. Now, I don't expect you to be able to read the print on this screen. It is a snapshot from a low impact development ordinance from the city of Titusville, which was more recently adopted in 2021. And as you can see, it's down the left-hand side. There's a column of LID best management practices, and it's in 3 categories. There are 9 from site planning, 6 from source control, and 11 from structural stormwater. And these are paired across columns for the various of 14 incentives. And these come in 3 categories. There's parking. They have count flexibility, reduce parking space dimension, reduce curbing, and reduce parking. And also there's open space, landscape, buffer, and setback incentives. And additionally, there's building height, building density. There's also expedited application. So you can see there's quite a myriad of ways to accomplish incentives through the best management practices. Ormond Beach also has an LID ordinance, and they've done a great job calling out strategies directly in their comprehensive plan. So we'll take a look at some here. You can see from utilities, future land use, and even conservation, they have some objectives and policies related to LID. The conservation element is really interesting because they have an entire goal dedicated to LID, and this is driving their land development code. Local governments should consider referring to a technical manual within the land development code, and we've provided several for review. Local governments may want to adopt one for their go-to manual. It doesn't and they don't necessarily have to create one. And these vary in size and also in jurisdiction. The contents typically include stormwater requirements and criteria, site planning, source control, and structural stormwater BMPs. The guidebook provides links to these existing technical manuals, which include formula to calculate pollutant loads. In addition, we also include the simple formula for pollutant removal calculations, which is used nationwide. So these books here are from Alachua County, Brevard County, and Sarasota County. Pinellas County also has a new technical manual 2021. It includes a matrix for highlighting the benefits to developers and residents for LID and GSI. We thoroughly discussed developer challenges and benefits during our meetings with the Regional Roundtable, as well as in Volusia County with their Environmental Natural Resource Advisory Committee. And finally, we're getting into technical manuals from municipalities. Here we've got Ormond Beach, Titusville, both of these have ordinances. And then also Winter Haven, which has done quite a great job of promoting LID in their municipality. Again, Winter Haven and Sarasota County have maps that you can click on and you can look at their various implementations. So up next is Jerry, and he is going to introduce to you the ordinance recommendations. The ordinance document also contains an LID ordinance template.
Good afternoon, everybody. Murphy from the New York IFAS Extension Program for Resource Efficient Communities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the LID ordinance recommendations. Next slide. This is our table of contents, and it goes over the various concepts that are included in the ordinance. Slide. And so environmental site design is kind of the philosophy behind LID and GSI. And it provides for a full evaluation of the environmental systems on a site prior to instituting development plans. Next slide. And it's a process of documentation and environmental site analysis and development impact analyses. Next slide. We first off try to address the major initial factors in site design, how we can design the primary site interventions like the road and streets, the driveway layouts, and the lot design and layout with respect to the existing environmental aspects of the site. Next slide. And there's a major focus on pollutant removal. After the site design, we want to reduce or eliminate pollutants through a system of pre and post development calculations. Next slide. And so this is an overview of the ordinance provisions for pre-development calculations using a GSI LID technical manual, of which there are numerous examples, as Mo mentioned, in the guidebook, or a local government can develop its own with the examples and guidance found in the guidebook. Next slide. So there are extensive ordinance provisions for post-development calculation for pollutant removal. And this is sort of the way that we address that. Next slide. And then post-development calculations focus on design points where the stormwater would leave the site and points of concern, which are the limits of a wetland or watercourse near or within the site. Next slide. And then, of course, the guidebook, as mentioned by Mo. You then utilize the technical manual to design GSI and LID interventions to manage that pollutant load. Next slide. And then the total of all the GSI and LID interventions are scored so that we can tell that the design has balanced the loads to achieve the post-development is less than or equal to pre-development stormwater pollutant runoff. Now we'll take a short break, and after the break, we'll return to discuss intent and purpose and the police powers underpinning the LID ordinance. And so going back into the ordinance, and we're going over it real briefly, it's quite a lengthy ordinance, and there's a lot of content in the slides that you'll have when the webinar is posted. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on them, but I want to let you know that then the ordinance actually begins with the intent and purpose, and this lays out sort of the findings of fact to underpin the regulations. And, our first intent and purpose is to protect water quality, and the local government leads this by example. Next slide. We also note that existing pollution has occurred from past development practices. Next slide. And we address and recognize the impacts of climate change, both now and in the future. Next slide. And then a focus is on both development and redevelopment. Next slide. And we also address the applicability of the local government's not interference, but engagement in this regard. And this ties the ordinance to the technical manual. Next slide. And then this distinguishes between the broad guidance of the guidebook and the local government's adopted technical manual. Next slide. We identify the need for professionals to apply these requirements. Engineers, landscape architects. Next slide. And then all development and redevelopment projects are required to comply with those applicable GSI and LID stormwater management and performance standards as provided in the technical manual. And the schematic details need to be provided so that staff and other reviewers can assure that the calculations are going to work. Next slide. And these are some of the other aspects of the ordinance that are covered in the PowerPoint that you'll receive PDF of this. There is a discussion of each one of these other points. But I wanted to spend a little time because much of our discussion in Volusia went around the distinction or the different opportunities with regard to requirements and incentives. And so I want to talk a little bit about incentives. Next slide. And in my experience, there are 10 steps to effective incentives. It's not just, give somebody a carrot and they're going to do something right. It doesn't always work like that. There's generally a calculation that the developer will make based on the cost and benefits. Do these incentives, are they valuable enough to him to do what's required to get those incentives? So next slide. So the first step is to determine the objectives. What is it we're trying to accomplish here? With GSI and LID, we're trying to improve water quality and the management of water quantity. So those are our overall objectives. Then we need to analyze our audience. Who can help us make these objectives come true? In the case of GSI and LID, it's going to be developers, engineers, folks in the development community, and members of the public, and also the regulators and the enforcers, the people who are going to have to make sure that whatever the requirements or incentives are, that those programs work. Next slide. I've lost my place. I'm sorry. Just give me a second.
That's okay. It's on, Jerry, it's on number 3, fact finding.
Okay. So then we want to go out and say, okay, we've looked at our audience. We've looked at what we're trying to accomplish. How can we make these improvements wherever it's possible for any new project? And our recommendations are that the ordinance has requirements to utilize the technical manuals. But the other alternative is using incentives. And our recommendation would be that if you want to use incentives for existing development, because existing development is much harder to retrofit instead of new development, where many times the calculation is going to come out, I'll just rather develop along the conventional manner, and not avail myself to whatever incentives there might be for LID. Next slide. And so we have to create rules and structures and develop a budget. What are these incentives going to cost the local government in terms of trade-offs? Is there available resources to manage the program? And are there available processes by which to manage the program? And then we have to select the awards. What are the incentives? What's going to be appealing? Is there going to be a match required by the government or by the developer? Where in the technical manual can we look to see what needs to be done and how can we incentivize that? Would that be bonus density, reduced dimensional regulations like setbacks, waivers of fees? That's the conversation in developing an incentive-based program that the local government and the public need to have with the development community to see what incentives are going to be sufficiently effective to make the program work. Next slide. And then you got to communicate the program. You have to have outreach to the public. They have to be aware of it. They have to be aware how important our water quality and flooding concerns are and how we're trying to address that and how GSI and LID are a very sound, environmentally based way to approach that. And we have to look at our operations, including just the processing of the applications. How are we going to track the results? How are we going to measure to see, what we can do? And again, this is a function of our budgetary means, our staff capacity, and other resources. And then finally, once the project has become complete, the incentives have to be awarded, and the sooner the better. It just makes it seem that the program is working so much better when everything happens in a timely manner. Next slide. And so, are we accomplishing our objectives? We have to evaluate that. And these are kind of the back end of the steps that involve the rules and the tracking. How are our incentives progressing toward our objectives? And then finally, celebrate success, reward the achievers. I think this is probably the most public-facing aspect. This is where you can get the most sort of bang for your buck in terms of elevating the process of LID and GSI into the public's foremost thinking. And we recommend also that the government take the lead, that they require themselves, even in an incentive-based program, that they require themselves to avail themselves to the GSI and LID techniques. And once they've done that, nominate those projects for local and national project awards. And then I think that's the final slide for me. Maybe we have a little bit of time for questions.
Yeah, Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Mo. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we do not have chat capability on the webinar today. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and raise your hands and we will answer them whether it's Jerry or Mo. One thing I didn't note at the beginning, please note that we are recording the webinar. So I've got Doug Robinson has a question. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just I appreciate the conversation about resources. Do we have any sense from these other counties and cities, you know, the level of staffing from a agency standpoint through the guidance? And I'll stop there.
Mo.
So, you know, I was going to say, I see Titusville in the room, and since they have adopted an LID ordinance, I would love, you know, to get a little feedback from how it's gone from you in the last, I guess, year and a half.
I unmuted you.
Thank you.
Be good. All you got to do is talk.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so could you repeat the question? Our experiences on developing the ordinance or implementing it? Or?
Well, yeah, I guess, I mean, obviously it's gonna depend on how much you want to take on your staff levels. You know, I get that, like there's an element to how far you go with your programs to support it, but I was just wondering if there's any sense of that through the different programs, and I guess Mo called you guys out, so.
Well, I had talked with Titusville a little bit at an open house we did recently, and perhaps you can talk about the couple of projects that have either come through the pipeline or are in the process of coming from the pipeline. Maybe just a perspective on that.
Yes, we. So the story is we had we still have what's called our area of critical concern where we protect our aquifer. And so our code had made provision for pervious concrete for many years. And so at some point we decided to extend that citywide. And so that's how we got into the LID game. So we developed the ordinance over a period of about a year.
Yeah.
A year. We have, and yes, you saw the metrics that we developed for the multiple BNPs that we consider and the incentives that can be given. For projects so far, we've had a few. We've had
Most of the incentives and the techniques they're using are the pervious, pavers, concrete, and then underwater storage retention. And they usually want the reduction in parking spaces and the extra benefit of having additional parking spaces.
Yeah, so that's one of our popular incentives is the flexibility on the parking, because some folks want a little bit more and others want a little bit less than otherwise required. So that's very popular. We also have the expedited review. We don't waive any fees. I saw that some other communities waive fees. That sounded very nice to me, but unfortunately we don't do that in Titusville. We've had commercial properties, mostly that have taken advantage so far. Gas stations, I won't mention any names, but the gas stations, we've had some, I think we've had a couple restaurant projects that have also taken advantage. So it's incentivized, it's not required, But one thing we do is that when folks come in and they're looking for some form of relief, for example, parking or stormwater pond won't fit unless it encroaches into a required landscape buffer, for example, then we sort of nudge them in the LID direction, because the LID ordinance does give you flexibility on those. For example, if you implement, say, a rain garden or a bioswale, that can go in the required landscape buffer, since the plantings and such will be compatible and kind of seemingly blend in. And then likewise with parking, as we've mentioned. So it's not required, but it's once the developer needs some form of relief or flexibility, we nudge them that way. So it's becoming more and more applied in increasingly applied in the projects that we're seeing coming into the city.
And just to follow up, did you what sort of staff resources are involved, and what sort of staff resources were involved in getting the ordinance adopted?
We had, go ahead, planners.
The amount of staff involved, I would like to say 50, but being such a small town, we're working on maybe 5. They had a couple planners, natural resource, stormwater. That was it.
In terms of the review process, so some of the elements of the review most of the elements of the review process would be part of our stormwater review, also part of our landscape review. For example, if our landscape reviewer catches, encroachment into a buffer, or there's not enough area for a full buffer as required, then we nudge them that way. So for review, I'd say it's been accommodated within the existing staff that was here. We didn't hire a new staff specifically for LID review, but it's kind of the different elements looked at as part of reviews by existing reviewers, particularly stormwater, landscape reviews, and
That's us.
and that's the sustainability planner, right?
Yeah.
And our sustainability planner as well. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, we have a few other questions. I'm going to try and address them in the way that I saw them, but might be slightly out of order. So, Darcy McGee, you had a question.
Everyone. I was just curious about maintenance and what kind of successes or not that you've had with being able to get people to maintain their LID.
Is that for Titusville?
For anybody that has some good news to share on that.
So I'll give you Titusville's to start with. So we haven't got to that stage yet, since it's been just over a year that we've actually started. However, our ordinance does have a requirement that the developer will sign a maintenance agreement with us that we'll keep on file. And so for each of the different practices, we have a little checklist for each one of what we expect. And for example, pervious concrete, should be pressure washed and such every so often, and they have to keep a log of that, which we will ask for. I believe it's on the 2-year anniversary.
Or if there's a major storm or something.
Or if there's a major storm event and so on. So yes, we do have a formal process for imposing the maintenance requirements and having the applicant sort of keep up with it on their own, and then at the appropriate time we'll do our audit to make sure that they are doing as was agreed.
Okay, so you're still new in the process, so there's no real track record of how that is gonna go yet.
That is correct.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
I would say that Doral has a requirement for maintenance. That's, like you said, to keep the efficacy of the LID implementations. And I've even seen, I think it was with Walton County, there had to be, like you have the agreement, it has to be transferred to the next owner. It can't just end, end with that when that owner leaves the property.
And just as an addition, I would share as well that Dr. Eben Bean with the University of Florida has done a number of different workshops, one designing LID with the maintenance in mind. So, whoever's actually designing those projects to be aware of the maintenance that will be required. And then also he has a training certification program for LID maintenance, GSI maintenance.
Great. And we're actually about to embark with him on an ordinance audit. It's taken us a while to get our ducks in a row, so we're really excited about that. So I'm hopeful.
Thanks, Darcy.
Thank you all.
And then Wendy Anderson, you had a question.
Hi, thank you, Katrina. I know I'm being recorded, but I don't care. I see that we have over 60 people participating today, and none of them are the elected county council people of Volusia County. How are we going to educate them about all of the things that we've been learning about so that when we go to them, when the NRAC goes to them with recommendations, they will understand the value of this and vote accordingly? So what's our strategy for making sure our elected officials are as up to speed as the rest of us?
So I will share that the webinar itself is going to be recorded, obviously. So we will definitely make sure that link is shared with our electeds. And I don't know if I know that I have a couple of folks from our growth and resource management team on the call. If anybody wants to add to that, Clay or Ginger.
Sure, this is Ginger Dare. I would say that a lot of the work that we're doing here is the initial work. The council is certainly aware of what we're doing, but as this is all going to go through our council appointed Environment and Natural Resources Advisory Committee, that's sort of the vehicle for getting the information back to them, right? So the committee will present their recommendations to the council when we're a little bit further along. And of course, in the meantime, it's always good for people to communicate the things that are important to them. The staff is communicating with the leadership in the council, and it's important for those elected officials here and in the other regions that may be working on this to have interested folks in the community reaching out as well and letting them know that this is something that's important.
Great, thank you, Ginger. Next question I had Andrew Landis.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Thanks. I'm with the city of Groveland and also with Rollins College, and I teach environmental planning, and we have a course on or a class where we talk about low impact development techniques. In terms of the water management districts, are you aware of them considering this when they issue consumptive use permits, like the consideration of that? For cities that are trying to grow, they need to obtain consumptive use permits. And in Groveland, we have low impact development policies in our comp plan. We have it in our land development code as required in different areas. And I'm just wondering if it's measurable. And we're really talking about going further with like really low irrigation landscapes or no irrigation landscapes. Is there a way that they're considering giving credit for that when they consider issuance of consumptive use permits? Thank you.
Right, well, I am going to pass this over to, I know that we do have somebody on the call from the Water Management District St. John's. If possible, if you would like to respond, not to put you on the spot, so fair play.
Yeah, I'll respond. This is Dave Miracle at St. John's. I'm not in our, good afternoon, everybody. I'm not in our consumptive use program. I'm the stormwater side of the house. I think the short answer is I'm not aware of any credits in the CUP program. There is obviously benefits. The more water conservation practices that are used, the further along their allocation can go in their CUP permit. So I think in a roundabout way, there is some incentive for water conservation, and the CUP rules definitely encourage conservation practices where feasible. As a sidebar, I've had recent conversations both in the northern part of our district and central part where it looks like Florida and upper Florida allocations are beginning to get maxed out as we project ahead, and there's more and more discussions happening about limiting outdoor irrigation or using our good drinking water. And so I think we're hitting this at a right time to look at stormwater as a resource as far as harvesting, using it for irrigation, combining that with the LID practices. So I hope I've kind of answered your question, but I think these issues are definitely coming to the forefront, both in the ERP and our CUP program.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And I would also share that Volusia County will be having a meeting with our water management district, St. John's River Water Management District, within the next few weeks. So to discuss low impact development and green stormwater infrastructure. Do we have any additional?
Katrina, is Pierce on the call? I don't know if I see him on there, but he had given us an example of both land development code and water management district preventing irrigation of new homes in a new development. It was I think it's in South Leesburg, and he was there to advise them, recommended use of soil amendment and Bahia landscapes that don't need irrigation or fertilizer. So, going to these more Florida-friendly landscaping practices.
Thanks,
And one more thing about the electeds, Wendy. We are considering doing a presentation to our East Central Florida Regional Planning Council Board, which is filled with elected officials.
That's great.
Thanks, Mo. All right, do we have any additional questions? Not seeing any hands raised. So with that, thank you all so much for your time this afternoon. I'm going to ask Jerry or Mo if there's anything they would like to add before we end the webinar.
Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for your attendance and for your input as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.